Hi everyone, hope you're having a great Friday. I've been requested from quite a few people now to do a bit of a talk through about pressure cookers, what pressure cookers to get if you want to do mushroom growing, and also some stuff around safely using pressure cookers, which is really important because you definitely don't want to make a mistake with these machines, that's for certain. So I thought I'd talk about these two pressure cookers I've got here today. I've got some other bigger ones, but they are quite expensive, and to be honest, I know a lot of you are just starting out with your mushroom growing journey, and I'm not going to go and recommend spending hundreds and hundreds of pounds on a pressure cooker. But these two are kind of like a introductory and I'd say like a intermediate level pressure cooker. So I'll talk about these two today. So this one, if any of you were in the Q&A earlier on last week, I would probably mention these two pressure cookers. But these are the two I'm going to recommend. So this one is the Prestige 6 litre high top, and I'll just go over the working parts of it so you can see. As you can see, this one is very old. I've had this one right the way back from the beginning of my mushroom growing career and journey as well. Really basic pressure cooker. Good enough size that you can fit a couple of jars in it. So obviously using like kilner jars as well. They quite comfortably sit inside with the elevated lid top as well. So you've got plenty of space that you're not going to interfere with the weight valve or the blowout valve as well. I'll come on to those in a second. But you can fit 2 of these litre kilner jars in there. You can also fit 1 production block or bag inside it as well of about 3.5 kilograms will fit inside. The way they work, these ones, they come with this rubber seal on the inside. These do eventually perish, but they last a very long time. I mean, I think this is only my second one that I've been on, and I've had this pressure cooker for 12 years now, I think. So long time, and they last, yeah, they're really, really reliable. It's quite simple locking mechanism. The arrows line up here with the front, with the handle, which also has an arrow on it as well. I don't know if you can see that. Push the two together and click, and that's what locks the thing together. The other part of this pressure cooker is the weight. This is when you have one, some of them have a kind of clicky dial on them. I much prefer the weight ones, just because they seem like they probably last a lot longer. And the really good thing about this weight is you can take the unscrew the ring on the top, and we have a L, M and H weight, and that is, if you just have that one on with the ring, that's 5 psi. With those two together with the ring is 10 psi, and with all 3 of them is 15 psi. So you can change the weight, but to be honest, if for mushroom growing purposes, you're never not going to use 15 psi because it's just the most efficient way to do it and creates the most pressure for you. So, safety features. Some older pressure cookers don't have these, but any new pressure cooker you're going to buy now will almost certainly have some kind of blowout valve, which is this valve here. And it's got like a rubber seal on the inside. And essentially what this does is that if for whatever reason you, through incompetence or forgetfulness, leave this running too high and the pressure builds up and up and up, and even with all the steam shooting out of this vent here with the weight on top, it's still pressuring and pressuring and pressuring and getting too hot and too much pressure, that rubber seal will perish, and then that little valve will fire out and release the pressure. So it's a safety mechanism that stops you from ever causing an explosion with your pressure cooker. It ruins the pressure cooker if you do that, so it's really not a good idea to do this because you'll have to buy a new pressure cooker, and also just doing that is particularly dangerous as well. Even with these safety mechanisms, it's best to avoid ever running into that situation. So I'm going to run through some pretty good safety precautions and ways that I combat ever forgetting about that I'm using a pressure cooker, which I'll come on to into a second. Other things that you will need to do with your pressure cooker, obviously they run on a basis of creating steam, so we need to put water into the bottom of this pressure cooker, and it's pretty important not to allow the water to run out into the bottom of the pressure cooker. So I always recommend usually about 3 or 4 centimeters of water into the bottom of your pressure cooker should more than cover the entire length of any cook that you're likely to do in these things. So making sure that you have that kind of level of water in the bottom. Also, with this one in particular, this one has its own mechanism, plate that comes with it to elevate stuff off the bottom, but this one you don't usually get the, I can't remember the name of what they call, they have a name. Anyway, something that's going to elevate the glass jars off the bottom of the cooker. So you can't put glass directly onto the bottom of the pressure cooker because it will crack and smash basically and ruin the glass jars. So you need to elevate them up, and I usually in the past have just used some jar lids, basically some spare jar lids that I've got lying around, and I'll put like 4, maybe 5 of them depending on the size of them in the bottom, which is just enough to be able to elevate them off the bottom so that the glass is not directly in contact with the bottom of the plate. And that stops your glass jars from ever cracking through the process of cooking them. So essentially with this pressure cooker particularly, we've got our water in the bottom. We've then added our jar lids onto the bottom to elevate the glass jars. And then we've obviously got our grain spawn or BRF cakes or bag cultures, whatever it is that you're sterilizing is then sat on top of that. Also, I would recommend, even though the plastic bags obviously aren't going to shatter from touching the bottom, the elevation is still really important, because I've definitely had bags melt and perish and create a hole through the plastic on the mushroom bag from being in contact with the bottom of the bag. So that's something to be aware of as well. So that elevation is really important. Yes, so procedure for running a pressure cooker. As I said, the most important things you don't want to do is let it boil dry or let it overpressure to the point where the blowout valve blows out. So there's a really set procedure I do. As I said, making sure there's enough water, so making sure you've got about 3-4 centimeters of water in the bottom. We've loaded all of our jars up. They've got our filter lids and stuff on. They're all ready to roll. We've put them into our pressure cooker, and we're ready to start our pressure cooking. At which point we're then going to turn our hob on to full power, and we're going to run our pressure cooker until we start seeing steam shooting out of the top of this vent. We don't straight away apply the weight to the pressure cooker. Now the reason for this is because you end up with cold pressure. What we want to, the steam that we create inside this pressure cooker is what does the sterilizing. The pressure just means that the water boils at a much higher rate, and at 15 pounds per square inch, water boils at 120 degrees centigrade rather than 100 where it would normally boil at. So we get a higher boiling point and more sterilizing ability. So we've now got our pressure cooker running. We're going to run it and run it and run it until we start seeing steam shooting out the top of this vent here, still open. That means that we know that the water is boiling. Obviously it's atmospheric pressure at the moment in there, but the water is boiling. What I then do is turn my pressure cooker right the way down to the lowest setting on my ring and run it for 5 minutes. The reason for this is that we want to try to equalize the temperature as much as possible before we start the sterilization process, because we need it to get really hot in there as well. And also if you've got like a massive bag of substrate, the core of that bag won't have even probably come up to any kind of temperature at all. The outside, obviously the water's boiling down here, but the middle of the bag or the middle of the glass jar with the grain in it is still at room temperature, or a bit warmer than room temperature. So we're trying to equalize that temperature through the whole thing. And we don't want to run this at full power to do that, because we're just wasting all the steam and using up all the water that we need in the bottom of the pressure cooker for the actual sterilization. So to do that, we just turn it down, run it for 5 minutes. And I always, having a timer on your phone, or if you've got a stopwatch or watch, like making sure you're setting timers so you actually have timers that are going to tell you to come and do these different bits. And that's one of the main things I use for safety, is to not forget about that I'm doing something, is always setting timers. So we've now run the cooker for about 5 minutes, at which point we're going to apply our weight to the cooker and then turn it back up to full power again on the ring. What will happen in time is that this little weight thing is going to pop up on the top of the cooker as the pressure starts to build up inside. This one also has a little blowout valve here, but it's also got another valve at the back here as well. With this particular pressure cooker, the Presto 22 quarts, I think that's the name of it, 22 quart one. For some reason, unless you've got a super high power ring, it can kind of just like not actually come up to this, up completely and elevate straight away and actually starts releasing steam. And I found that it needs a little bit of back pressure behind it to actually get that valve to come up and stay up. So what I found I do is when I start seeing steam coming out of the back one, this is after I've applied the weight, which on this one is just a 15 psi weight that sits on top of this pressure cooker. I then get like a fork or a spoon or something and just hold that valve down so it's airtight, builds up the pressure enough inside this pressure cooker that when I release it and remove the foot, obviously don't do it with your thumb because it will be getting quite hot, but just something to hold that down, and then it pops up and stays up. At that point, it's a weird design feature with this one, but it's really easy to get around. And then we're then bringing these pressure cookers up to pressure. Obviously this one has gauge, so you can see what's going on with the pressure, and you'll notice that when it gets to 15 psi, this thing starts rattling and releasing steam. This one doesn't have a gauge, but again, you know when it's up to pressure because it will start rattling like this, and you'll be like, kind of sound of steam releasing, and you'll see the steam coming out as well. So it's pretty clear when it comes up to pressure. The gauge is obviously useful to know what's going on and whether it's depressuring as well. But again, you'll know that from this one because if it's set too low, it will stop rattling. So we now run these pressure cookers up until they're completely at pressure, and we've got this rattling process. And then we need to find the spot. I cannot tell you where that spot's going to be on your cooker because it will depend on what the size of the pressure cooker you're using, either this one or another different pressure cooker, or it will be dependent on how powerful your hob is as well. But there will be a place on your hob, and what you're looking for is for your pressure cooker to be firing off a little bit of steam and then maybe going back down for about 2-3 seconds and then firing off another little bit of steam. The aim is to try to hold the pressure cooker at 15 psi. We don't want it to dip down too low, but we also don't need to overpressure it and have it going off like continuously, just like crazy amounts of steam coming up, because that's using up all the water in the bottom, and it's also using up loads of energy as well, which you don't need to do. I mean, it's much better to find the spot. So what I recommend with this, if you use the same pressure cooker and the same hob a lot, you'll probably just eventually work out with which ring you're using on your hob, where exactly the sweet spot is essentially on the cooker for where that pressure cooker will just hold pressure. If you've got a dialed one, you can find out obviously what number it is that will do that. It's a lot easier. If you have, like I do, I have a gas ring, then what I used to do at my old house was have a spot where I knew exactly where it was, and I just got like a Sharpie and just drawn a tiny little line on the cooker exactly where I need to line the line up on my hob with the marker on the hob. And at that point, that's your pressure cooker completely up to pressure. And that's where you set your timer, and how long you run it at that pressure depends really on what it is that you're doing. If you've got a lot of material into a very big pressure cooker, you'll have to run it for longer. This one, even if it's the most amount of material you're probably going to do in this pressure cooker is one big substrate bag, and I would probably run this pressure cooker for 2 hours if I was doing one of those bags in here. This one I sometimes run for 3 hours if I've got it completely packed out. And again, that's just to give it enough time to make sure the pressure and the steam have penetrated right the way into the center of that material. Obviously, the bigger the amount of material, the longer time it's going to take for it to get into that thing and sterilize it. Yeah, so once we've run the pressure cooker, obviously you'll have to work out how long you need to run it for the amount of substrate you're doing, but there were some rough guidelines. When we finished the pressure cook, before we put it, obviously we now found it at this spot, we set our timer. This is the other really important thing, to not forget that we're pressure cooking and we are setting timers for stuff. So we make sure that when the timer goes off, we come out and turn the pressure cooker off. And that's all you need to do. There is no point, firstly, of trying, which would be really dangerous, to straight away open this pressure cooker, because obviously it's at pressure and the lid's just going to fly off and tons of steam is going to come out in your face. That's really dangerous. And also it would be pointless, because the bags inside there, if you try to pour mycelium or grain spawn or put a liquid culture into that grain and it was that hot, not only would you not be able to handle it because it would burn your hands, but also it would just kill the mycelium. So it's absolutely pointless doing anything. We have to wait until the contents of these pressure cookers have come down completely to room temperature. So all I usually do pressure cookings late afternoon, and then I will leave it until the following morning, and it will just sit there. That's a kind of pretty much a sealed environment, so there's no chance really of contamination getting in. As long as you've left the weight on, that thing's popped back down. It's a sealed environment. You really don't need to worry about it at all. So we can just leave it till the following morning, or give it at least kind of 12 hours, I would say minimum, to make sure that it's completely back to room temperature again. And at which point you can then take your blocks or your jars or your grain jars or your BRF cakes and take them to your inoculation and do your inoculation and move your culture on onto your next sterile food source. So yeah, that's a quick overview. If anyone has any other questions about what I've just been talking about, do put them in the comments, and yeah, I'll keep uploading more useful videos to help you out with your mushroom growing. Thanks everyone.